there needs to be informed consent dealing with legislation that directly affects inherent and treaty rights. That is the law today, Terry. That's not unrealistic. That is the law of Canada. Do you think that the government of Quebec would have been able to develop hydro in northern Quebec without the prior approval and without a treaty? Why do you think they negotiated? Why do you think it took a year to get it done? Got it done because it had to be done. There had to be an understanding. There had to be that level of consent and understanding. And by the way, that's the law of Canada, as it has been expressed and interpreted by the Supreme Court of Canada. The relationship between the Crown, and this is the 250th anniversary of the Royal Proclamation, which Elder Robinson referred to. The relationship between the Crown and the First Nations people and the Inuit people of Canada, Métis people of Canada, predates Confederation. So there should be no surprise that there's an importance attached to the Governor General playing an important symbolic and role in terms of being present and aware of discussions as they go on. No one's suggesting for a moment that the Government of Canada is not the Government of Canada. But I think it betrays, frankly, a little lack of understanding of the relationship between the Crown and First Nations to suggest that it's of no symbolic importance. The point that I think we wanted to make in the Declaration of Commitment is that these are things that are going to take time. These are things that are going to require work. But the issue, for example, of revenue sharing and how that relates to the provinces is obviously something that we all have to discuss because there is a very profound sense, certainly, for example, in Northern Ontario, a situation with which I'm very familiar, I know Charlie Angus is familiar with it, where there are real issues now around how we're going to be able to proceed with major resource development without the involvement and participation of the Aboriginal people and without recognizing the rights that are there. Same thing is true with respect to developments in northern Manitoba and in northern parts of every province of Saskatchewan. These are issues that are very real and alive today. So you may have your own personal editorial view with respect to this declaration, but it is an absolutely realistic assessment of the steps that need to be taken in our lifetime if we are, in fact, going to achieve the reconciliation of which I've previously spoken.
Well, let me add to that the fact that, as I mentioned, I've been at this for 30 years, and these are issues that I've dealt with over the years. And I can tell you one thing: when there is political will to change things, we can move pretty fast when it is necessary. And I'll give you the example of the latest agreement that we signed with Quebec back in 2002. Everyone thought in Quebec that the Cree and the government of Quebec would never get along. Everybody thought that. But where are we today? We're in pretty good terms, a very good relationship. Why? Because we came to a point in the struggle, in that fight that lasted for over 2 decades. We came to a point where the court, and that's why it's important that we talk about what the law of the land is today with respect to Aboriginal rights and treaty rights. It took the Superior Court of Quebec to say the terms of the Forestry Act of Quebec are incompatible with the provisions of the James Bay North Quebec Agreement. That got the Premier of Quebec moving at that very moment. It took that. So is that what we're waiting for? And let me add to what was just mentioned. The international law with respect to Indigenous peoples around the world, 370 million people, has also evolved. And a vast majority, an overwhelming majority of countries have now approved the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And the norms that are there are minimum standards that all countries should respect and have endorsed the UN Declaration. Canada finally came on board not too long ago. Thank you very much. But let's move on from there. Those are the international norms now, and we need to move forward from there on.
Just on that, Terry, as well, as Indigenous peoples, we always say to move beyond the duty to consult and accommodate. That's referenced in Supreme Court decisions from Taku River and Mikisew Creek, and to utilize the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and use free, prior, and informed consent. And when Indigenous peoples are involved, that brings economic certainty. Economic certainty, because under treaty, we agree to share. treaties were not meant to make us poor in our own homelands, to share, equally benefit. So we have to move beyond and start looking at concepts like resource revenue sharing as in the best interests of Canada. They're fundamental human rights. It's in Canada's best interest to look at those mechanisms now to move that file forward, because it addresses poverty. And if we were to share and benefit from the land and resource wealth that's there, it can deal with housing and the gaps in education and everything else. So it's basically bringing about that change that's required. And they cannot be unilaterally exploited anymore. The lands and the resources cannot be exploited without the full inclusion and involvement of Indigenous peoples. And it's referenced in Supreme Court decisions and within the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so that we got to move forward collectively together. That's all.